We got my man Tommy B. What's up, Tommy B? Chilling. What's up? What's up, Big Johnny? All right. Yo, why don't y'all send a shout out to some of the peoples out in Minneapolis real quick?
Oh, some of the people out in Minneapolis, to everybody in Minneapolis, coming straight from Tom Alam, straight out of Washington Heights, you know what I'm saying? The real ball players, as you can see. You know what I'm saying? So keep it real, keep it nice, and keep it New York, all right?
Yeah, what you got to say, big man?
Hey, yo, peace to everybody in Minneapolis, you know what I'm saying? This is Jay Quest, you know what I'm saying? My man Ralph and everybody underground, you know what I'm saying? Peace.
Freedom Radio.
Peace, everybody. We are definitely back on the scene in the state of Minnesota, in Minneapolis to be exact. We are on the University of Minnesota campus. This is in our series of Spotlight prior to the Super Bowl, 2018 Super Bowl. You know, the media is going to definitely be focused a lot on this city. And we're trying to present some different narratives behind the city, behind the people in the city, many times that you may or may not hear about. One of which I am glad to catch up with this young man here today. We're going to kind of have a focus on basketball. This is a up-and-coming basketball program at the University of Minnesota. We're kind of checking that out. And we're also going to revisit the legacy of the GBA, very pioneering kind of street basketball league that stemmed from the city of Minneapolis, that actually moved outside of Minneapolis to impact other things around the culture of basketball and hip-hop in those pioneering, innovative years between 1997 and let's just say 1999, that 2-year period, and we can give or take a year in between, very influential in the sport of basketball and its unique connection to hip-hop and the culture of hip-hop. So, my brother Doug, what's happening, man? How you doing?
Oh, it's great to see you, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
It has. Well, let's talk about something real quick. In this city, there was a basketball league that started called GBA, the GBA, Ghetto Basketball Association to be correct. Just the name in itself and in that time and place was a very interesting observation on culture and its relationship to community. And an extension of hip-hop culture, which we'll also get into. But talk a little bit about yourself, first of all. What you study and how did you get to the state of Minnesota and where you are presently?
Oh, yeah. So I'm a sociologist. I started my first job here as a professional sociologist in 1997. I went to college or graduate school in UC San Diego.
Mm-hmm. And for the audience, what is a sociologist?
A sociologist, we study society, we study groups, we study movements, things people do together. My particular emphasis is about race and sports, mostly race and sports in the United States. And I had, when I got here, I was looking for a new project. And I was really interested in what was happening with basketball in cities. And my little angle on that, I mean, you know so much about this. I feel like already you're being too humble. I mean, GBA was your thing. It's where we connected. But I was drawn to it because I was really interested in programs that were using basketball in cities to make a change in society, make a change in people's lives. And so when I first got here, I think it was 97. I had read a little bit about this program and what you were up to, and I think I reached out with the idea to study that, and that was at the same time I think the city was getting interested in what you were doing and wanted to fund at least a part of it that was really oriented towards social intervention, and it kind of came out of that whole, there was that moment, the homicide summer earlier in the 90s, and the city was still trying to figure out how to deal with those problems, how to reach out to the black community. And my recollection, and you know, I wrote a book on a lot of this, and but for your specific program, is you guys had gotten big doing a lot of things with that program. I mean, even started with the Inner City All-Star Classic and a lot of things, but the city was really interested in using this as a tool for social improvement in the society and the communities. And I was interested in that. And so I reached out and said, hey, I reached out to you first, I think, and said, well, maybe we could study something about this. But then the city was also involved. So that was my starting point. I was interested in basketball, in urban life, but my specific angle, which you helped me to broaden out a lot, but my specific angle and the focus of the book was about basketball as a means of social intervention and social change.
Okay, and let's kind of draw the picture of the time and place. 97, to be exact, marked a lot of different things in the city, well, actually in the country for that matter, but for those who are very interested in the local kind of narrative around that, I believe this was the year that Khalid El-Amin was coming out of high school around that time. We'll have to fact check that. But there was a lot of different energy happening around the aesthetic, the style of basketball play at the time. Its connection to a street kind of free flow way of playing the game, unchained, if you will, unshackled. You know, a lot of times basketball and the sport of basketball, just like a lot of other things, gets consumed by politics and the power of politics. And usually what that does is at times it takes away that raw talent that we love to see executed on the concrete, on the streets or in the parks or in your community center gyms. Once it gets to a place of organized high school sports, let's just say, or beyond college or professional sports, usually the politics kind of take away from that certain style of play. So the GBA was something that was in line with a lot of programs, well, not necessarily a lot, but a lot of energy. So, for example, you had around this time, you had the And One mixtapes that was happening. You had the organization around the Rucker Basketball League in Harlem, New York, that was coming to a place of really coming at the top level of organizing behind that to impact community and the culture of community at that time. This was right before, and we'll get into this too, kind of the commodification of street basketball. And that's a different topic. But the GBA specifically in the local conversation, I'm really excited to revisit that, because 97 to 2017, there has been a lot of change, but somewhat there's still a same almost pull to use sports to be a outreach in community issues, specifically around youth. And so what I want to do right now is I want to acknowledge a few people in the context of this conversation. First of all, the GBA would not be what it was and is without the Inner City All-Star Classic. That was an annual basketball game started in Minneapolis, designed to serve the Twin Cities senior basketball players that were overlooked in the black community by the Minnesota State High School Basketball League. This game started in 1994, and it's been very successful. It was started by myself and Derek Rubin, who is a longtime friend that I grew up with and played basketball with on my father's AAU team.
Who's the better player?
Derek. Yeah. I'm more on the organizational side, but I can definitely do my thing. But yeah, so big shout out to my man Derek. Also, those who actually played in the GBA. I think I know the GBA has been something that has been in folklore, if that's the right way to say this. It's been something that's ingrained in a permanent memory of a lot of different people who were able to participate in this innovative basketball league that not only showcased outstanding talent, but it also branded itself in terms of even clothing, and that moved out to influence actually things that were happening in New York and in the California area at the time period. So very interesting story. So if you played in the GBA, or if you had anything to do with helping in the GBA, I might end up calling everybody's name out, but if I don't, you know who you are, and so this conversation is for you. So thank you, and let's go ahead and get into it. So my man Doug, how did you hear about the GBA at the time, and what was your initial impression on even the branding of a bold name like Ghetto Basketball Association?
Okay, there's several things there. I was kind of taken aback by Ghetto Basketball Association because, I'm a white guy who studies stuff and studies basketball and race, and a lot of what the scholars who study this, both white and black, they focus a lot on how sports, even though everybody thinks sports is this great thing for race relations, how it ends up a lot of times reinforcing racial stereotypes and things like that. So when I first heard Ghetto Basketball, I was like, who named that? Like, what's going on with that? Right. But then once I got to know you, once I learned this wasn't like imposed, but in fact grew up from the streets, then it takes on a whole different kind of meaning. For me, what was astounding to learn was how many different angles you were bringing to bear onto that, with the merchandising, with the tournament, as well as the league. But now to get to your main question, how I learned about it was, I think it was, I had just got here in 97, so I didn't follow the first year or so. This was my exposure to Minneapolis, but there was a story in the paper. Maybe you'd already started a little collaboration with the city, which was kind of framing the program. The one aspect of the program that was part of their crime prevention initiatives. And so I was interested in that because not only was I interested in basketball and blackness, but because I was interested in this thing, and this is the title of my book, Midnight Basketball. Midnight Basketball was this policy idea that actually started late 80s with the first George Bush, and got accelerated with President Clinton, where they were championing these late-night basketball programs as solutions to the crime problem. Now, it's interesting. It was both Democrats and Republicans, and they were doing it from different angles. But I was super interested in the history, where that crazy idea came from, the politics that surrounded it, because really what happened in 1994, it blew up. It was super controversial. 94 was when the crime bill was passed. It's still our crime bill. And Midnight Basketball was the center of the debate. And then I was interested, given how controversial it was, what's actually happening on the ground with programs like this. And so that's what I was like, GBA, I got to learn about that because it's probably a variation on this theme. Come to find out, it was way more complicated what you were trying to do, both in terms of your whole agenda, but also working a basketball league with the city. That's where I started learning a lot. I can't believe it's 20 years ago. I got to tell you. I was thinking you might have got the years wrong, but you're absolutely right.
Well, before we take our first break, you said you were interested in basketball and blackness. Define what you mean by that.
Yeah, so let me back a second up. So why I'm interested in sports, I think of sports as what the great critical race theorist Stuart Hall called contested racial terrain.
Okay, break that down.
Yeah, so that's, to me, an activity in society what is deeply racialized, what kind of becomes like a stage or a microcosm of all the race relations and racial stereotypes getting played out in society, that we watch, and it impacts all of us, whether we're white or black or whatever backgrounds we're from. We're seeing race on a stage. So I think of sports like that. I think sports is like this stage, this dramatic theater where America's race relations are played out right in front of our very eyes, whether we realize that or not. One step further, basketball is like the high court. I mean, it is the pinnacle in a lot of ways of where sports and race come together for the black community. And I think it's a place where African Americans dominate the sport, they dominate the aesthetic, they have more opportunities to control. I mean, now, let's not get it wrong. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar industry, and it's still run by the establishment. But there's a lot more opportunities, a lot more variations, a lot more levels in basketball. So always fascinated with that as a stage for both black African-American identities and communities, but also white images of blackness and how that all kind of cycles together. And so that was why, like, my initial thing here with Midnight Basketball is there's a policy angle on that, this idea of intervention and change, but then all the other things you were doing, for example, that ties to all these other themes about commodification, about marketing, about community resistance and activism. So for me, when I think about basketball and blackness, it's how all that swirl of things fits together, where, again, it's a contested terrain. There's like positive things happening where you see progress and change. Then you also see real racism and exploitation going on as well. To me, sport just brings that all together. And basketball, again, is like this high point of how that happens in America.
Well, that's definitely a good intro as we get ready to dive in. So basketball and blackness, we have sports used to do certain things around community engagement, and we have this interesting, innovative idea that turned into a real tangible thing with real intentions for the community called the Ghetto Basketball Association. So we're going to take a break right there, and we'll be right back with Professor Doug Hartmann from the University of Minnesota.
How we doing?
That's good.
Freedom, radio.